This is my presentation about Isamu Noguchi. Isamu was born in 1904 in LA. He lived in Japan between the ages of 2 to 13, and he then went back to the US by himself, where he attended high school. After that, he went to med school at Columbia, but he took sculpture classes at night. But he soon decided to quit med school and to pursue a career as an academic sculptor, and thank goodness he did, because his work is amazing. It's important to understand that Noguchi had a complex identity because this influenced all of his work. He was born in LA. His mom was American with Irish descent. She was a writer. And his dad was Japanese, and he was a poet. He moved between Japan and the US, and throughout his whole life, he traveled very extensively. And he had studios both in New York and Japan. He is known for saying, "I feel at home everywhere and nowhere." And I personally can relate to this after being born and raised in Sweden and moving here to the US in 2012. I still think of Sweden as my home, but I also feel at home here. But at the same time, I don't feel at home here because I don't have any of my childhood memories here. And when I go back to Sweden, which I see as my home, for the first few days, I feel like a complete foreigner. So I can kind of understand what he is talking about. This identity or search for home influenced all of his work, and he was able to find ways to bridge the East and the West in his art. And I think that's one of the reasons he was so successful. He was very good at adding subtle Japanese influences to everything he did. Here are two examples. This is the Sunken Garden of Yale University and the East Bridge in Hiroshima's Peace Park. So he has artwork both in Japan and in the US. Another event that added to his complex identity and that definitely influenced the work that he did for the rest of his life was the attack on Pearl Harbor. After the attack, the backlash on Japanese Americans were really severe, and it had deep personal effects on Noguchi, and that's what led him to become a political activist with his art. He co-funded Nisei Writers and Artists Mobilization of Democracy, which was an anti-fascist group, and he voluntarily entered the Poston concentration camp in Arizona, where he stayed for 6 months, and he actually finished up a sculpture while he was there. Afterwards, he set up a studio in New York where he worked with different materials, including stones. And you can see his ideas and feelings of this time reflected in these delicate stone sculptures. Here on the right is an example of one that was made in 1940 called Humpty Dumpty. It has these rounded forms interlocking, which I think might be a symbolism of the West and the East coming together. It's made out of wood and gray slate. It has no glue or screws. And although it's a playful name, it has an ominous undertone, which references the unstable state after World War II. As I said on the previous slide, the sculpture Humpty Dumpty didn't involve any gluing or screwing the parts together. I thought this was interesting, and I did some research and found this quote: "Everything I do has an element of engineering in it, particularly since I dislike gluing parts together or taking advantage of something that is not inherent in the material. I am leery of welding or pasting. It implies taking an unfair advantage of nature." I think this gives us a good insight in who Isamu Noguchi was as a sculptor. I wanted to include this artwork because before this he wasn't that well known in the US. So in 1940 he was commissioned by the Associated Press building in Rockefeller Center to make large-scale sculptures symbolizing the freedom of the press. And this sculpture was the result of that. It depicts 5 journalists using different tools such as phones, cameras, notepads, and it has a lot of movement and energy in it. He basically represented them as everyday workers that were building the truth. And the fact that he made it in steel is inferring that these are heroes of truth. This sculpture also symbolizes that Noguchi believed in the social significance of sculpture. And this was just the first of numerous celebrated public works that Isamu made worldwide. In addition to Noguchi's work being quite politically charged, what draws me to it is that it's quite calm and spiritual and even meditative, if that's a word, in a way. This quote by him describes his style pretty well. I want sculpture equal to myself walking. He didn't look at sculpture as being just an object in a museum or something on a pedestal. To him, sculpture was supposed to be part of life. It was supposed to be part of the background where it was, the nature around it. It's not so surprising that Noguchi also designed gardens, parks, and playgrounds. He said, I don't have much faith in objects. I tend to believe in the space around an object or in non-material things. Noguchi believed that art should provide something other than information and knowledge, that it should shape space and give it order and meaning, and he wanted his art to disappear or be as one with its surroundings. These three pictures are great examples of how he used these philosophies in his work. First, we have the Noguchi Garden in Costa Mesa, California. This reminds us of a Japanese dry landscape garden. It's a place where people can walk or meditate or just enjoy their day, and the aesthetics is really fitting with its surroundings. We have the green, huge Moerenuma Park in Japan that has big architectural details designed by Noguchi. And then we have a playground in Japan. And the philosophy behind this is he wanted something to ignite the children's imagination. He didn't want it to be like an instruction manual, like a typical playground where this is how you use it. He provided something for the kids to see and decide for themselves how to play with it. Another quote by Isamu Noguchi that I think is really inspiring and that I think really shows what type of artist he was is everything is sculpture. Any material, any idea without hindrance born into space, I consider sculpture. So maybe that's why he was able to create and he was interested in creating so many different types of art. I mean, he did relief sculptures, he did stone sculptures, and then the gardens and parks that I showed, and even playgrounds and furniture. Noguchi's Akari light sculptures are super famous. They are these lamps that he made after he visited Gifu, Japan, which is known for its lanterns and umbrellas made from mulberry paper and bamboo. Noguchi designed these using traditional methods and materials, and they are beautiful. I personally love these lamps. I think they give the perfect light. It's not too bright. It's very welcoming. The shapes are beautiful. The lightness, like the weightlessness of it, just adds to the beauty of it. And he said, inherent in Akari are lightness and fragility. They seem to offer a magical unfolding away from the material world. And I totally agree. They seem almost organic, almost like they come from nature rather than a lamp store. He named them Akari, which means light. And he meant light as illumination, but he also referenced this idea of weightlessness thanks to their weightless material. Akari are poetic, ephemeral, and tentative. And Noguchi was fond of saying, all that you require to start a home are a room, a tatami, and a kari. Noguchi's art to me was very special, and I really liked learning about him. It's hard to do this presentation because when I started reading about him, he's really fascinating, and there's so much I could say and so many pictures I could add. But I hope this gives you an idea of who he was, and I really encourage you to look him up because he did really beautiful work. And he also just seemed like a really beautiful, good person. Throughout the course of his life, Noguchi decided that he is a citizen of Earth, that we all inhabit this planet together, and that art and design should have a social purpose to improve the way we live. Noguchi is considered to be one of the giants of modernism, as he so artfully combined tradition and ancient culture with technology and function. His art was both subtle and bold, and traditional and modern, and he was great at taking modern Western design and influencing it with subtle traditional Japanese details and philosophies. In the top left, you can see a stone sculpture that also serves as a bench because he liked his sculptures to have a function. And then we have the light sculptures and we have the garden. I wish I could sit down and pick his brain, like ask him, how did you decide to do this shape? Or how did you decide to put this stone here? He just seemed like he had a really fascinating mind. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation, and thank you.